I feel bad for boxing fans. And as a hardcore MMA fan, I wanted to extend an invitation. And I wanted to let all the boxing fans know that the grass is greener on the other side. Check out my sport of MMA, okay? Because not only did their, number one heavyweight star get embarrassed last night by an MMA fighter, but everything that has to do with the way that boxing promotions run the show is shit, okay? They don't know how to promote fights. They don't know how to put on a show. And this is why boxing is a dying sport. It's an old head sport, okay, for stubborn old heads that just don't want to admit that there may be something better, okay? Because at this point, watching a boxing event is insufferable, all right? It takes forever to just watch the actual fights because there's so much downtime in between. You have concerts. You don't even know who's on the co-main event. You don't even know who's fighting on the feature fight. They do such a bad job of promoting these fights. Half the time I don't even know their biggest stars are fighting until the week of. Until I see some YouTube video that's recommended to me and it's a Canelo face-off a couple of days out from his next big fight and I haven't even heard about it. And I'm a massive combat sports fan. They constantly drop the ball in every single aspect of the fight game. And I'm going to get to it right now. I'm going to talk about everything. The press conferences, the way that they actually run the show on fight night, the walkouts. I'm just going to get to all of it. And I'm going to compare boxing. And I know not all boxing promotions do the same thing, but they're all pretty damn similar. And I'm going to compare that to the UFC because I really mean it. These boxing promoters are stuck in the Stone Age. It's just too formal. Nobody gives a fuck about what Bob Arup has to say at a press conference, all right? Let's just get to that first. Think about the difference between a UFC press conference and a boxing press conference. At a boxing press conference, you have Bob Arup. You have the other promoter, another guy, maybe a Eddie Hearn up there. And like the first 15 minutes of a boxing press conference is just them going on this long spiel, this tangent that nobody cares about, talking about the significance of the event, stroking their ego, telling everybody how they put the fight together.
So what we're going to see on Saturday is something very unique, very exciting, and I think we're all privileged to be here.
Just talking just to talk, just a formality, and it's so boring. It really is. I remember I tuned in for the Ngannou Fury press conference expecting, because I have seen a couple of interesting Tyson Fury press conferences, just like the ones that he did with Deontay Wilder, and I was expecting it to be lively, and there's just Bob Arup on his long tangent. In the UFC, it's real simple. Dana White gets on stage, all right, depending on the city where he's from, he says, "What's going on, everybody? What's up, Houston, Texas? It's time to get into the questions," and that's it. The press conference is on. The fighters are talking. They're going at each other a little bit. The reporters are asking the fighters questions. Every once in a while, they'll throw Dana White a question. And us fans, we usually don't like it that much, but it rarely ever happens. And not only do you have these promoters, Bob Arup, Eddie Hearns, go on these long 15-minute tangents where the actual fighters are just sitting there doing nothing. But then we have to ask the coaches questions. Then the coaches get up and give their individual speeches. Then the mentors and the fathers and the uncles and the godfathers give their individual speeches. And then the last 5 minutes, you get to see each fighter give an individual spiel. They're not even asking them questions. They just go on a spiel, and maybe if we're lucky, they'll trash talk each other. These boxing press conferences suck so much. And again, they're stuck in the Stone Age. This may have worked back in the 1920s, but this is the fight game. And I find it hilarious how boxing fans or these old head boxing promoters, the people that are just grandfathered into the industry, look down on MMA and UFC and whatnot. And they're probably saying to themselves when they see our press conferences, this is such a circus act. There's no formalities. There's no class. They've got to slow down, man. They've got to slow down. There's more to it than a big circus act. It's just this patronizing attitude that I hate from these boxing old heads, okay? Like these guys, you tell them you watch MMA, you go to a boxing gym, okay? Tell any of the old trainers at the gym and say, yeah, I was watching the UFC this weekend. And they'll look at you like you just admitted to committing a crime. They'll say, oh, those guys have no class. Those are circus sacks. What are you watching those clowns for? Those guys don't know how to punch. It's just so fitting with the way that they promote their fights, too. They're so stuck in their ways. They're too stubborn to make a change. All right? They need to stick to the rules. They need to stick to the format. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's no fun. It's not time to have fun yet. The circus comes before. All right? The press conferences need to be fun. But in their mind, it's like, all right, well, now we dealt with all the formalities. Everyone's dealt with the bullshit. It's time to give these guys some fun. Bring out the dancing monkeys. Bring out the clowns. And they think this is some kind of a treat. Like we're kids that have just eaten our vegetables. Oh, they got to eat their veggies before they get their dessert. Fuck you. And then they do these 10-minute stare downs, which are completely unnecessary as well. You don't need a 10-minute stare down. How many photo ops do you need? And then let's just get to the way that they promote the fights on the day, okay? I have no idea who's on the undercard for any of these boxing events at all. Okay, this is why boxing's a dying sport, because outside of the top dogs, outside of the champions, nobody knows who the contenders are. There's no way for us to know, because you know what the UFC does every single time there's a fight night, or what ONE FC does every time there's a fight night, or the PFL or Bellator? They always post a picture with every single fighter, their last name, who they're fighting, what time their fight starts, okay? It's simple. You know exactly the order of fights, who's going to be fighting and when. You have no idea. I checked Top Rank Boxing, okay, because I was worried, well, maybe if I tune in at 2 p.m. when the card starts, is that going to be the first fight on the main card, or is it just going to be the main event? Because I don't want to be stuck waiting around for 4 hours watching these fighters that no one gives a fuck about because no one promotes them, and maybe they would be cool if people promoted them, but at the end of the day, they're just bringing up cans. They're so bad at promoting these fights. They really are, man. I haven't heard of any of these guys on the co-main event of one of the biggest cards of the year in boxing. And then there's like 30-minute breaks in between each fight, okay? The only time you'll see a long break in between fights on a UFC card is if it's the prelims and they need to stretch it out to meet the time requirements because they have to have a certain amount of ads. But once you get to the main card, okay, let's say a fight ends early on the prelims. You're going to have to wait a little bit longer, but it's going to be max 15 minutes at the very max. On the main card, okay, which there are usually going to be 5 or 6 fights, especially on any pay-per-views, which would be the main card as well. If a fight ends in the first round, the UFC doesn't need to extend the time at all. They just go right into the next fight. There's no more than 10 minutes in between a co-main event and a main event on a UFC card. We had to wait an hour, okay? Maybe even more last night between the co-main event and the main event. Okay, I think I started my live stream. I wanted to do a whole live stream reaction to the card. First of all, the live stream went on for 4 hours and 45 minutes. I started the live stream. The co-main event was about to start. It took like 30 minutes for them just to get the co-main event out there. And it wasn't like the feature fight had just stopped. It takes 30 minutes for them to get the co-main out. The co-main event ends early, TKO. If that were the case in the UFC, 10 minutes more, and then you're going to be watching the main event fighters actually start throwing punches. But in this case, we needed to see more Francis Ngannou and Tyson Fury interviews. Okay, as if we haven't already seen enough. As if we're not already watching the main event. As if we're already not tuned in. We're here. You've convinced us to watch. And again, there's this whole song and dance. Literally songs and dancing. This fucking concert. So there's like 20 minutes of interviews, these old recycled interviews of Francis Ngannou and Tyson Fury, as if we're not convinced, we're not hyped enough already. We got to see these little one-on-one, super intimate interviews with these guys. We've already heard all the talk. Then they go to, they pan over to some old head boxers that get on stage and talk about, I think this is going to happen during the fight. And they're talking for like 15 minutes. And then we have a whole fucking concert with, I don't even know who was performing at the concert. I forget. I totally forget. A UK guy, a woman was up there. It's like, why, man? Like, we're here to watch the fights. This is why the UFC succeeds. It's because they weeded out all the bullshit. They weeded out all this fucking flash, man. They don't need dancing monkeys to keep you entertained. Boxing old heads and these fucking old men that run the show over there in boxing, they think that, the more stuff, the more flash, the more smoke, the show's going to be great. Oh, they're not going to know what to do with themselves. It's just too much. Cut to the chase. We're here to see a fight. We don't want to spend the next 4 hours watching Tyson Fury interviews and Bob Arup speeches. Okay? And these shitty concerts where these rappers that are usually auto-tuned are now sounding like shit because they actually have to sing and perform. It's so annoying, man. And then when the concert ends, you see Michael Buffer. You see Michael Buffer in the cage, and he starts to say the words, all right, the moment that you've all been waiting for, it's finally here. And then there's this crazy intense music, and I'm thinking, okay, time for the walkouts. And just that moment, he sits there, stands still in the ring. There's intense music. That's about 5 minutes long. I kid you not. That was about 5 minutes long. Nothing's happening. No one's talking on screen. I guess Tyson Fury had to take a shit backstage. Oh my gosh. And then we, of course, don't forget the panning over to the locker rooms. You know what? About an hour after the co-main event is done, Tyson Fury's getting his hands wrapped. Okay? An hour after the co-main event. Tyson Fury is still wrapping his hands, and Ngannou's arriving to the arena. Are you fucking kidding me? Ngannou's arriving to the arena. Basically, an hour after the co-main event. If this were the UFC again, an hour after the co-main event, the fighters are out of the building. They're on their way home. Jesus Christ, man. They're wrapping their hands before the start of the main card in the UFC. Yeah, man, this is just so ridiculous. So that moment was like 5 minutes with Michael Buffer standing in the cage after saying, the moment you've all been waiting for, we have to wait another 5 minutes of intense music. And I think then they showed another promotion for the fight, and then Francis Ngannou walks out, and that takes 10 minutes, and Tyson Fury walks out, and that takes 20 minutes, because obviously, the A side in boxing always wants to make sure that the fighter that walked out first goes cold, and they lose their warm-up and all that. And then the fights themselves. This is the last order of business. The fights themselves just are not that entertaining. Even though we had a lot to talk about, even though Francis Ngannou shocked the combat sports world and did something that was crazy and provided a couple of entertaining moments, the fight still, if you really just are going to be honest with yourself, it kind of sucked. Outside of the first round where Fury caught Ngannou with a good shot, outside of that third round where Ngannou dropped Fury, it was a slow, boring fight for the most part. Like, I was actually getting a little bit tired, man. The UFC, there's just much more entertaining styles. And I've been fair to heavyweight boxing before, because heavyweight boxing is usually where the entertaining fights are, because, of course, they're a little bit less technical. They're a little bit less skilled. They rely on their power a little bit more. And I've seen some amazing boxing fights. Fury Wilder 3, one of the best fights I've ever seen, okay? Fury Wilder 1 and 2 was a good fight. But every other boxing fight I've ever watched, they've all been boring. Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, that was boring. And that was like, boxing fans were pulling their hair out over it. It was boring. It just was. It was anticlimactic. It wasn't that competitive. These super high-level boxers, they don't scrap, man. You don't have any Charles Oliveira's going out there getting in someone's face and scrapping right off the bat. You don't have Yuri Prohaskas, okay? You don't even have Habib's. It's one-dimensional. These guys throw a couple of punches per round. Usually the high-level boxers don't even get going until the later rounds. I watched Canelo versus, who is the last guy that Canelo even fought? Charlo? I had to turn it off after the 10th round. I watched 10 rounds of it. It was 12 rounds, and it sucked. It just sucked, man. And this is what they're usually getting. I'm sure there have been a couple of good scraps. Lomachenko versus Devin Haney was supposed to be good, but, bro, I'm just happy I'm an MMA fan. MMA is so much more entertaining, man. It really is. Now, don't get me wrong. We have our fair share of boring fights, but for the most part, a lot of high-level fighters are actually extremely entertaining and high-paced. We don't have this 3 punches per round bullshit, okay? That's how it is in boxing. In MMA, we have rounds where these guys are hitting each other like 60, 70 times. Watch Dustin Poirier and Charles Oliveira round 1. Watch Charles and Gagey round 1, man. Guys, if you're a boxing fan, come over to MMA. It's simple. It's straight to the point. It's straightforward. You can cut through all the bullshit. There are no songs. There's no dancing. There are no concerts. All right, you don't have to sit around for an hour between the co-main event and the main event. You can actually follow the fighters that are on the come up that are unranked and know who they are, and the UFC does a good job of promoting them. These guys have interviews. Like the fighters that aren't ranked in the UFC, they have media days. They get interviewed. They all have social media presences. Boxing's terrible. It really is. And for Ngannou to go in there and showcase that there's not a big skill gap between him and the best heavyweight boxer on the planet, even when Francis Ngannou was not looked at as the super technical boxer, is like a nail in the coffin. Again, this is heavyweight boxing. I get it. Francis Ngannou is a freak of nature. If anyone was going to go over to heavyweight boxing and have that chance, it was Ngannou. But still, the chance was to be by KO. It wasn't going to be beating Tyson Fury skillfully, hitting him with body shots, walking him down, imposing his will. Fury on the back foot, fighting scared. So if you're a boxing fan and you're not just a stubborn old head that doesn't want to change his ways and you like 7 punches per round and you like tuning in for a Bob Arup interview, or you like to see some dead air time where Michael Buffer's just there in the cage and there's this weird music going on for 5 minutes and no one's speaking, and that gets you really hyped up and you like yourself a 30-minute walkout, I totally get it. But it ain't for me, and I'm guessing that it ain't for everyone. So until next time. What is up, guys? It's Lucas Tracy MMA here, and I want to let you guys know that I have something for you, and that's a real food cookbook. Because if you're walking around looking like Chris Dawkins, you got to get that weight off. I don't know if you think you're DC or something, but most people usually don't perform at their best when they're walking around with 30% body fat. So if you're trying to lean out and you still want to eat good, tasty, comfort foods, well, you could check out my Real Food Cookbook, because I've made it a purpose to have good, tasty foods that you can still eat just without all the processed bullshit, without all the processed ingredients like soy and seed oils. So guys, check out the Real Food Cookbook. Use code MMA for 30% off. The link is in my description. Don't forget that discount.